Just wonderful. Thank you very much.
Mr. Cunliffe had already had two, so that's why it's your turn.
Okay, well that's great. So,
Not on this part,
Mr. Chair, Part 3 of the Student Loan Scheme Amendment Bill number 2, and as others have noted, this is the parts of the bill that amend the Principal Act that apply for 2014, 2015 and later tax years, including the amendments relating to the meaning of adjusted net income and the amendments relating to the repeal of the provision of the 10% bonus. Now, we support the provisions around amendments relating to the meaning of adjusted net income because that will be fairer. We think that all borrowers should make an equal effort to pay back their student loan. We also think that those who receive their income from a company, a trust, superannuation scheme or other source should be treated in the same way as those who earn a weekly wage. And to be honest, just as an aside, that is often not the case. So we're pleased to see that in this regard, some of those other forms of income are being drawn in and treated equally. We understand that broadening the definition of income will save the Crown approximately $7.5 million over the next 5 years. That's according to Treasury, and so of course that is a positive as well. So those provisions in clauses 63 through to 68 seem to us to make sense and are the reasons why we are supporting the Student Loan Scheme Amendment Bill. But there are concerns, and as my colleague Megan Woods has talked about, we have concerns about how this fits in the overall approach taken by the government to student support. And there's been quite a number of attacks that have been made on student support in an attempt to dampen demand, that's a quote, for tertiary education. Now, to us, that seems crazy. And given the kind of economic change that we need in this country, given the need to be smart and agile, given the need to really lift performance in our workplaces, we need to invest more. We need to be smart and innovative. And a major part of that is investing in our young people and, in fact, in all of our learners, not just young people, anybody who wants to upskill themselves and participate to a greater extent in their career. And so we're concerned about the number of changes that have been made, and some of the examples that perhaps have already been mentioned, but I think it's important just to reinforce them. Over 55-year-olds stopped from accessing the student loan in budget 2011. Now, that just doesn't make sense. We want older people to continue in the workforce for longer, and while we have high unemployment at the moment, the overall demographic trend is for an ageing population where we are going to want and need older people in the workforce. That means they are going to need to be able to upskill, to look at career changes, to do all of those things, and arbitrarily cutting off access to student loans at 55 is short-sighted in the extreme. Also, limits on part-time students borrowing for course-related costs. That was a cut in 2010. Budget 2010 also imposed a 2-year stand down on new residents accessing student loans. Again, if people can get into some form of tertiary education and get themselves the kind of qualifications they need, that's probably a very sensible way to commence their residence in this country. After all, they do have to pay that money back. In 2012, the National Government passed legislation to reduce the overseas-based borrowers' repayment holiday from 3 years to 1. And that goes counter to such a long tradition and such an important element for many New Zealanders, and that is that they study, they go overseas, they develop contacts and networks and have other opportunities there that they then come back to New Zealand and is beneficial to our economy. And we did not support that. The decision in last year's budget to remove the allowance eligibility for postgraduate students is the one that I want to really focus on now, though. That has to be the most short-sighted and unfair thing that could possibly happen, given the need to make structural changes in our economy, given the need to really look at innovation, to look at how we can support manufacturing in this country, the sort of manufacturing we're going to need to be involved in, isn't just lightly processed commodities. It's going to need to be an elaborately transformed manufacturing, and we need people with ideas and smart things. Mr. Chair, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We want these people to stay here, and the fact of the matter is that those students who are likely to want to continue in postgraduate studies are likely to be some of the brightest New Zealanders that we have, who are wanting to keep learning, to research, to do those things. And what are they going to do? If they can't access support here, they will go offshore. They will be snapped up. We do have a good tertiary education system. We have a good education system overall. They will be snapped up and taken on by overseas universities, and once they are there, they will end up being part of a research pool and part of a brains trust in other economies and not in ours, and that just does not make sense. This is an enormous waste of New Zealand's potential. We do need more people doing postgraduate study, not fewer, if we are to grow our innovative economy. And all the while, so all of these cuts and dampening of demand and short-sighted, economically damaging actions by the government, all the while student debt has continued to grow, with the latest figures showing it's reached $13 billion. $13 billion. Student loan debt is now a huge burden on young Kiwis starting out in their working lives, and certainly for most of those people, they have no concept, or the dream of owning their own home, for example, is very much seen as outside of their reach. Now, combine that with some of the other initiatives of the government and the chances of them minimising the loans that they need to take out when you, for example, bring in youth rates. Bring in youth rates like we just had. Well, one of the consequences of that will be that young people will be less able to save for their tertiary study. What does that mean? Well, they're going to have to borrow more. So that's certainly counterintuitive to reducing student loan debt. Keeping wages down, 25 cents an hour increase in the minimum wage, same thing. Young people concentrated, if they can get work in minimum wage jobs, even if they're not on the youth rate, on very low wages, less able to save to fund their tertiary education studies, therefore having to take out greater student loans. I could go on, but the point of this is that those things, combined with some of the cuts into student support, are just a recipe for a disastrous economic outcome for us, and also for those individuals. Social mobility used to be something that we valued in this country. It was a country not that long ago where if you were a kid with ability, you could go on, you could learn, you could get a decent job, you could expect to do well for yourself and your family. That is no longer a reality for so many New Zealanders, and that is something that I think we really need to consider. Do we want to have a have and have not society? Well, over this side of the house, we don't. And tertiary education is a very important bridge to making sure that people have opportunity. And so these things are very, very damaging. So going back to this part of the legislation, to part 3, just to remind the House that we are supporting these provisions. We think that they are logical and fair. They unlike the overall approach of the government to student support, they are sensible. The overall approach is one that we don't agree with and we think has major economic consequences. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Honourable David Cunliffe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's a mistake.
Mr. Chairman, that was very kind.